They're here. Are they here? Oh, okay. I love this topic, by the way. Talking about passwords. Yeah. All right, I will turn it over to Marianne. Are you going to be doing a presentation at all? Or? Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. I was getting a little nervous because I couldn't see behind me in the back of the room. I couldn't see any of the panelists, but thank you all for coming. We're the last session of the morning, I guess, before the awards presentation, but we also have the longest title, which is Beyond Passwords and PANs, the New Frontier of Identity Management and Fraud-Free Commerce, Powered by Anonymous Biometrics. So hopefully you'll all remember that. But my name is Mary Ann Crow. I work at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, and I've been in payments for a long time, but I'm not a practitioner in the fraud and security space. I don't have a fraud operations background or developing tools and solutions as my three expert panelists have. But I have been involved in payments, and for the past few years have been working with our Secure Payments Task Force and our Secure Payments Group at the Fed, more to do research and outreach with industry folks like yourselves and others to understand where we're going, in particular with fraud reduction and authentication, how we can improve that, how we can implement it in terms of ways that it complements some of the other things if you've probably heard about in the last couple of days around addressing fraud and security. So my role has been, as I said, more working and engaging with the industry around that. But we have three experts here today who are involved in solutions and technology around fraud and security for authentication and some of the new things that can complement what's out there today and move forward towards passwordless. And we also have someone whose organization, Fido, is trying to pull it all together so that we're all on the same page and we can continue to try to grow adoption in the more sophisticated ways of reducing fraud and addressing and improving authentication. So what I'm going to do first is ask each of you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with the Q&A. So, Jeremiah, you want to start?
Hello, everyone. You can hear me okay? My name is Jeremiah Mason. I'm the head of product here at AuthID. Our company specializes in passwordless authentication using biometrics and also device-based authentication as a way to stop fraud and make customer experience much better.
Hi, my name is Deepak Jain. I'm the founder and CEO of Wink, which is a 2-year-old startup. And our mission is to eliminate passwords, and we are providing a biometric checkout as well as a biometric authentication platform for institutions to embrace biometrics as a way to secure both identity and payments.
Hi, my name is Christina Holker. I am the Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of Fido Alliance. For those of you that haven't heard of Fido, which I'd be surprised if there are any people in this room. We're an industry organization of over 250 members who are working to reduce the dependence on passwords and replace it with something that's simple and secure for everybody around the world to use. We also have a number of certification programs that go along with that, and we're very actively working with implementers today to really get rid of passwords.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think everyone would agree, generally speaking, that if we didn't have to ever use passwords again, that would be a great thing, as long as we had something else that was really great to take its place in terms of authentication. So first of all, I think what's important is to understand what this group means by passwordless authentication, anonymous biometrics, things that fit together. So I'm going to ask each of you, and maybe Christina, you could start, but how would you describe anonymous biometrics and its role in authentication for e-commerce?
So in the context of Fido, obviously, as I mentioned, we're looking to remove the dependence on passwords and looking for something secure and easy to use that replaces that. So biometrics is part of that. I mean, Fido accommodates all kinds of other authentication methods, but biometrics specifically really to use a biometric to access a service or something that you want to authenticate against. And with the proliferation of devices out there that support biometrics, whether they're on device or whether they are as a separate USB key or Bluetooth device, that's sort of where we're looking to sort of expand our scope.
Okay. And Deepak, how would you fit that in with Wink?
Yeah, for us, anonymous biometrics is really biometrics applied in a specific way that solves the problem of trust, which is really a key problem for consumers to adopt biometrics. And that problem, in our view, can only be solved if the consumer is in complete control of his biometrics. He can be assured that his biometrics are not used to track him or her. He can wipe their biometrics at any time and opt out of a service that's relying on biometrics to authenticate him or her. And also, only the consumer has access to their biometrics. No one else has. So that's what we mean by anonymous. Also, the fact that the technology should be such that you cannot reverse engineer the biometric data and clone it or things of that sort. So from our perspective, anonymous biometrics should meet all of those criteria for consumers to adopt them and trust them.
Jeremiah, how would you fit that in?
Sure. So I'll build on everything else that colleagues have said here. But here, when we look at AuthID, we look at biometrics as this is the way forward in how we eliminate passwords. When you look at authentication today, it's typically based on something you know, something you have, or something you are. And we know that this something you know factor is failing us, right? All the data breaches that we see in the industry today, all the different account takeovers and the phishing and smishing attacks, the what you know is no longer useful to us. So it's time that we shift from the what you know to something that we can really tie back to the user's identity, and that's the who you are. And anonymous biometrics, cloud-based biometrics, all these biometrics, when used properly, are a terrific way to help make the user experience much better, to help prevent account takeovers and the different types of attacks that we're seeing in the industry today, and also the different types of fraud we're seeing. So overall, biometrics are really just they're the new frontier for how we're going to eliminate passwords, because of the fact that it's tied to who you are, and you can't attack that in the same manner or the same ways that they're being done today with passwords.
So just building on that a little bit more around some of the key problems and the risks with current authentication methods. I mean, we talk about multi-factor authentication, talk about different types. How are those, what are some of those challenges with those things that you could prevent with the new methods? But, what are some of the problems that exist today that even though we have them, organizations continue to use these different methods of authentication?
Sure. Would you like?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I'll start with, the problem with today is that there's really three key problems with the way we authenticate today. The first one, it's incomplete. And when I say incomplete, what I mean is today we authenticate, we go based on, well, the user knows this factor. Well, from all those reasons I just outlined, going based on a knowledge-based factor opens up many different attacks versus, whether it be phishing or smishing, social engineering, those can easily be compromised, and that leaves the door open for all types of fraud. The second problem is weak recovery. So in a lot of organizations, they'll go and they'll implement OTP or they implement other types of strong authentication for the front door. But then the bad actors will simply just go around that front door and then go back to, well, what's the way that I recover? And you'll see in the industry today, there's a lot of large data breaches that have actually been executed because of weak recovery methods, not because of weak authentication methods. And then finally, the user experience. We see that the user experience in passwords is severely lacking. When myself, I look at my phone, probably have 80 to 100 different accounts where I have to remember a password, and now I have to pay for an app to help me remember my passwords, right? So we can do better for our customers as a whole in the industry, instead of forcing them to pay for an app to manage passwords because we can't get the right solution out there to them.
I'll focus on the problems faced by the merchants or app developers or institutions that are offering a service to consumers, and many of them rely, or all of them rely on some sort of a front door where you have to onboard a customer or log in the customer using a username or password. For merchants selling stuff online, it's clear that the lost password journey or the reset password journey is a big barrier to completing a sale. There are lots of statistics available out there that show how much money is lost, or consumers simply move on to somebody else to complete their experience because they couldn't recover the password correctly or couldn't get it in time, and so on. So that's a popular known problem for merchants. Account fraud, account compromise for bad actors getting access to your credentials and posing as someone else is a well-known problem as well. These days, a lot is being said about account sharing, where merchants and app developers are losing money because their subscription is illegally used by 10 different people using the same username and password, and they have to deploy additional infrastructure and make life harder for consumers to prevent them from sharing the accounts, all because of username and password combinations. So lots of problems, and then the merchants have to invest in additional compliance infrastructure, additional IT security infrastructure, cybersecurity infrastructure to all solve the problem that's root cause is the password. So definitely as an industry, focusing on eliminating the root cause could really make life easier for both the merchants and consumers.
Christina?
Yeah, I would echo what you both have said. The user experience is challenging, and oftentimes you'll see service providers sort of confused about the alternatives and implementing the lowest common denominator that everybody understands. So user experience is definitely a challenge. And then I'm sure everybody sees, there's pages and pages of data available about compromises, data breaches, phishing, smishing, and all of the various attacks that have been further exacerbated through the pandemic as well. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges with passwords, and I think that the industry is definitely motivated right now to move beyond that and look for alternatives that are more secure and easier to use.
Let me just throw one other thing that in terms of how big a risk is the consumer themselves, how guilty are we as far as creating or exacerbating this problem, even using the existing tools that, if they're used effectively, at least they might work for now. So do you see the consumer as a big piece of this problem too, by not just their experience, but just the way they behave?
I would say it's human. It all comes down to human nature. I know myself, it's best security practice is to have a different password and have 50 characters or whatever it may be for every website, but I can't remember all that, and it's just too difficult, right? So it all comes down to human nature, and that we're going to do what's easiest for us, what's most convenient, and unfortunately the attackers and the bad guys are taking advantage of that, right? So it's our responsibility to say, well, what's more convenient, and put that in their hands.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't met a single consumer who wouldn't agree that password is a big problem for them. And they encounter that problem multiple times a day, not just for e-commerce or logging into your bank app, but in your education apps or health care apps or any kind of app. It's always a problem. So as a consumer, definitely you need to provide something that's simple and safe. And some of the alternative technologies out there haven't today yet done the job, which is why the password still exists. And the password manager apps out there are a band-aid to the problem. They're not a solution to the problem either. So and that's what we at Wink are trying to solve is how do we provide something simple and safe and easy for consumer so that they can finally try to get rid of having to create a new password.
Yeah, when I think about my own bad habits, I should really know better.
Well, that's kind of why I asked the question, because even people who have the background, who understand it, we all are just as guilty in many cases of using the same passwords or modifying just the last character or two, or I admitted it, I write them down and hide the piece of paper, but if somebody found it, they know all my passwords. So that's why we need to really have some changes here. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the benefits of moving towards the biometric and passwordless direction around authentication. And maybe, Deepak, you could start with that one.
Yeah, certainly. So biometrics, if done correctly, and really taking advantage that things like the camera on the phone and the microphone available on all devices out there, if done correctly, biometrics can provide that combination of safety, simplicity, security, peace of mind that the consumer is looking for. But the key word is done correctly, right? If you make it hard for the consumer, then they're not going to adopt it. But definitely biometrics with technologies like facial recognition, voice recognition, behavioral biometrics that track how you use your phone, available biometric sensors on phones, and so many other capabilities are out there that can be utilized properly to offer a great experience. And that's the potential of biometrics. Definitely, it is here to stay, and it is here to be adopted. I think we're still looking for the right solution. But once it's out there, we'll all be using biometrics to finally get rid of passwords.
Jeremiah?
Yes. So I have a question for everyone. If you can just raise your hand if you have an Android and iOS device with you right now. If you have a mobile phone that's Android or iOS, imagine everyone has at least one of those, because I don't think anyone has BlackBerry anymore. Maybe so, right? But we all have biometric potential in our hands right now. And thanks to the work done by the Fido Alliance, vendors like myself, we can tap into that and we can harness that power to then make your authentication experience to different services much easier. So, to me, the best benefit of biometrics is that it's already in our pocket. We're already using it to log into our phone, right? We use our Face ID or Touch ID. So why not capitalize on that and use that to just make my life better? And the one thing is with consumers getting more used to biometrics today, that also opens the doors to more advanced biometrics, such as what my company does, where we have cloud-based biometrics that's used ethically, to then use that to then combat fraud and stop other types of attacks that are coming at me as a consumer when I'm shopping on my favorite website, and make my life better.
Christina, can you kind of tell us how Fido fits in to support all of that?
Yeah, so building on what you both have said, and thank you to Authid for being a member of the Fido Alliance and contributing to the work we do. So yeah, you're exactly right. So we have these devices in our pockets. Where Fido fits into this is a couple of things. One is interoperability, is the standards that Fido provides in the certification program that Fido utilizes to certify products ensures that all of those biometric devices you have in your pockets can work across multiple services. So every service that's implemented to the Fido standards will work, the biometrics will work interoperably with those. So that's the first thing. The second thing that Fido does is there's no shared secrets, so nothing leaves the device. So your biometric information, when you register it for a service, it's kept on the device. So if there were to be a data breach down the road, there's no sensitive data there to be stolen. And so that protects your identity, that protects your privacy, and it basically makes for a much more secure platform that's also easy for consumers to use.
So we have solutions, we have the technology, we have the support structure through Fido and organizations that work together, and yet we don't have the adoption, the growth, the way we'd like to see it moving as quickly as we can, and buy-in from the organizations, the banks, the companies, as well as consumers. What are the obstacles that we have to overcome to try to increase use and adoption? Who wants to start on that one?
I can start with that one. So I'd say, I'm sure you probably cover other ones, but the one I really want to cover, there's many obstacles, but the biggest one it's companies, like the IT companies like myself, right? There are some companies like our peers who use technology and the biometrics in a proper ethical way. And there's other in the news that use it perhaps in the not so ethical way, or they get fined, or they make the headlines for violating the different biometric privacy laws that we have. And every time that we have a company that does that, that then slows down progress for everyone else wanting to then adopt biometrics as a whole. And it puts fear in the minds of the consumer and of the organizations themselves who want to implement the solutions. So the first thing is we need to, as an organization, like as an industry, make sure that we adhere to the proper regulations and ethics and guidelines, right? So that's what, we're heavily committed to that. And then after that, we can then start to begin to make progress in all the other areas that impact the adoption of biometrics.
Can I just ask for further elaboration on that point about ethical use? What's an example of unethical use?
Yes, so a lot of times users are very uneducated in what biometrics are or how the biometric is being used, and it's very common for organizations to misinterpret how the user's biometric is being used. Is it being used in a one-to-many scenario, so where they're being used in a matching scenario against multiple other different biometrics, which can be seen in a negative light? Is that biometric being shared? Is that biometric being pulled off of the internet and they're using people's images on Facebook as a way to train their algorithms? So being very transparent about how that technology is being trained and leveraged.
Yeah, definitely from a consumer standpoint, the trust factor is really something that we collectively as an industry have to find ways to build. And that really is where the bad actors who use biometrics to track consumer behavior without their permission, to show them marketing, advertising without their permission, to use data to train their algorithms without the consumer permission, and also making it difficult for the consumers to opt out of biometrics, and also making it not very transparent for consumers as to where their data is and how it's being used. All of those practices make it harder for consumers to trust that biometrics can be used for elimination of password and making their lives easier. So that's the biggest challenge for all of us players in this industry, is to build that trust with the consumer, that if we do this correctly, we can really utilize the benefits of biometrics without using it as a tracking tool and to sell more things to them.
Yeah, to continue the thoughts along the user experience, I think it's making sure that certainly in the conversations that we have within Fido, everybody has multiple devices using multiple platforms, and each of those device facilitators or the service providers has their own way of communicating this. So one of the things that we're really focused on is making sure there's clear aligned rules across the industry to instruct service providers how to instruct consumers to register and utilize their biometric. I think that's a challenge, and there's a lot of confusion out there because each platform, each service provider communicates in a different way. The second part that's a little different from the theme that has been talked about here is the actual implementation of this technology. It's pretty daunting. And we talk to a lot of organizations in Europe where they have pretty strong regulations around authentication, and specifically PSD2. And there's a reluctance to spend the money on figuring this out and actually implementing the more robust solution. It's kind of like, well, let's do the minimum we can do to get where we need to be compliant. So compliance is kind of a priority as opposed to really thinking through the appropriate solution. So these are all challenges that we're working with the various service providers and stakeholders we have all over the world, globally, to make sure that there's a really clear understanding, implementation guidance, and support to get to the point in time where we have a ubiquitous solution that really is simple and easy for consumers to use, as well as being secure.
Okay, so So the question is like, well, so who's really responsible? It sounds like, every individual organization has to do their own thing, deal with implementation, but the customer rollout and the understanding and the trust, is it an individual company responsibility, or is it something that we have to collaborate and do across the U.S.? And, what are your thoughts on that in terms of moving this forward effectively in the United States?
That's a great question. I would say one of the big things is Fido Alliance really helps with that, in the fact that once we standardize, well, what's the framework for how we can do this authentication? It's then, well, then how do we get that implemented, right? So it's a little bit of both, right? We have, like I mentioned, we all have the tools in our pockets right now, and as a vendor, I know there's a framework in which I can easily, sell a solution to my customers, in which they can then tap into that product, right? So it's really a whole ecosystem play, and it's how do we continue to get the word out that the ecosystem exists today, and that there are vendors out there who can help you, get the right tools in your environment in as little as 10 or 15 minutes to be able to tap into the technology that is living on every user's device today.
Yeah, it's definitely an ecosystem problem to solve collectively with collaboration. There are obviously big players who have a lot of influence with consumers. In the payment space, guidelines are set by the payment networks, and the banks implement those, and that drives the confidence and the trust and the usability with consumers. In the general app space, it's the platform developers like Apple and Google that have a lot of influence with consumers. Ultimately, these big players have to drive the know-how and the support for technology, and then it's up to app developers and innovators like some of us here, and all working in collaboration with each other to really bring out the right solution. I firmly believe that the right solution is not there yet. We don't have one yet. Face ID is not a good solution, in my opinion, because you have a 6-digit PIN backup. If you are a bank wanting to know who actually logged in to your internet banking, you don't really know. All you know is somebody logged in using that device, but you don't really know who actually logged in. So the right solution isn't yet there. It's coming. It will definitely be, and biometrics will be the key. But it's a combination of having the right solution, having the right customer experience, and having the right industry backing for the right solution. That will drive this forward.
And it was kind of a lead into FIDO in terms of how can the rest of the industry, in addition to those already in FIDO, help FIDO and other organizations like that move this forward?
Yeah, there's many ways you can do that. There's active developer discussions going on in W3C across public forums that you can access by the FIDO website. We welcome any perspectives from a security and interoperability perspective. As I'm listening to my colleagues speak here, I think interoperability and security are the two key areas where we need to continue the work to evolve these solutions. We welcome great security and interoperability minds to come participate in all those forums, whether that's as a member of FIDO or externally as just an industry participant. I do believe, I would echo what my colleagues here have said, this is going to be an evolution. There's no perfect answer today. It's taken us a long time to get to this point, and will continue to evolve as technologies evolve. And so, we welcome any participation across any level that you want to engage with FIDO to make that happen. But industry collaboration is really important, and anybody that has a voice is welcome to share that.
Good. So any last thoughts from each of you before we open it up to the question and answer?
I think I just said what I really wanted to conclude with is, please come speak to me. I'm around after the conference. If you're interested in learning more about FIDO or wanting to engage with FIDO, I'm happy to share any opportunities that we have to engage either on a technical level or on a business level. We welcome all voices to really make the future passwordless, and that passwordless future secure and easy to use. I think they're the key things here.
Yeah, on our side, we focus a lot on the payments market and seeing how biometric tokenization can work hand in hand with biometric authentication to solve not just the identity problem, but also payment fraud problem. And biometrics can actually do both. So that's a key area for us to look at. And sometimes it takes a killer application to take the technology forward. So payments could be a killer app for this, in our opinion as well. So and a lot of work done in the Web3 space with blockchain and securing identity and decentralized identity. There are lots of fascinating work that's going on that's to look forward to.
And I would echo the same thing that biometrics are a great way forward for us as a way to eliminate passwords. There's lots of different types of biometric technologies out there today, and depending on which vendors you work with, there's solutions where you can have a mixture of device-based biometrics and cloud-based biometrics. One of the things I mentioned was today, when you look at device-based biometrics, identity is still one of the key pieces that is a gap when working with device-based biometrics. And my company, one of the things we focus on is augmenting device-based biometrics with the identity of the user, meaning that it's portable across the board. So I think many vendors will start to have solutions in that space as well. And when you start combining device-based biometrics along with cloud-based biometrics, you'll see that you can start opening up workflows in which you can let the user log in with the least amount of friction, always keeping CX in mind. But then how do you then verify on a per transaction basis, is this user who they claim to be at the time of the transaction, whether it's buying something for $10,000, whether it's transferring money, whatever may be high risk, at that time of transaction, verifying that user's identity was something beyond just the device, but actually going back to who is the user. And that's going to be the future of our industry, is being able to understand who that user is in real time and not just the device, but it's going to be a combination of the both. And it's not going to include passwords at all anymore, because that's just not going to help anyone. It's not going to really suit the bill anymore.
Yeah, and I think from all of you, everything you're saying, there's so many things we have to do, and we can't do it individually or in silos by individual groups. So we really need to try to work together through some different areas of collaboration, working out the problems, discussing them. What do the banks need? What do the merchants need? What do the providers need? How can we all do this in the same direction in order for it to happen? Because there's so much out there. As you said, the solutions are there, but they still need work. They're still forming, but we have to do that, I think, as a group to make this happen and get rid of passwords at some point. Questions? Yes. Yes.
Our industry is still heavily based still on one-time passwords. Emails and SMS can be spoofed, and then especially working with banks or business transactions, they're still reliant on like RSA and one-span hard tokens. So how does that play in terms of where once we go biometric and once we go FIDO2, and it's going to kind of displace the idea of one-time passwords, and then how do we make that shift? And then what do you think will happen? Do these two things have to play together for a period of time, or will one completely displace the other?
I think you have to have a migration path, right? When I'm talking to a lot of customers, that's one of the key questions to ask is, well, how do I migrate? You have to have a seamless migration path, and you also have to have education, right? It's a new technology, and while consumers are more informed than ever, this is still a new technology that they need to be educated on and how to use and how to implement it. So I think it's going to be, how do you have that proper migration path, but then also how do you educate the user to help them get on board with it? But to an RSA token, you no longer have to buy that because you already have the power of it in your pocket today. It's on your laptop, it's on your Mac, it's on your Dell, whatever you may have, it's already there. So it's just tapping into it.
Yeah, from what the work that we are doing at Wink, we do not rely on any type of one-time password. No SMS, no email, nothing that can tie back to anything that's protected by a password. So what we use is a combination of device biometrics with face recognition and voice recognition. And you can use these technologies in such a way that you don't have to rely on any memory-based authentication techniques. So it's definitely possible to achieve a migration away from from one-time pins as well. And RSA tokens and other hardware type authentication techniques work well for enterprise use cases where you are securing data for a workforce or for a controlled environment. But for consumer use cases, that is a non-starter. So having a good combination of device and cloud biometrics is a solution that can eliminate both the password as well as one-time pins.
Any other questions? Yes.
I was going to refer the last session. So one of the panelists was having, he said like there is a dynamic facial authentication, right, to be implemented so that we can actually the facial authentication truly kind of adopted by the world. Because I can see I'm the developer in Delta. When I was a developer in Delta, I have launched facial authentication and ATL airports. And I've seen people not using that facial authentication. They're afraid using that facial authentication, right? So I'm trying to relate this question of Delta passenger concern why they had, because a gentleman in the panelist, he said like the facial authentication not truly implemented today, right? So what you guys are doing in implementing the dynamic facial authentication?
Can I take that? Yeah. So the problem of logging in a customer or authenticating a customer on a public device is a far different problem than authenticating or logging in the customer on his personal device. What you're talking about is a use case for a public device. So one of the solutions possible there is to delegate that authentication back to the customer's personal device, where on the public device you're just scanning a QR code or entering a phone number, which then sends a message to your personal device, and you authenticate on your personal device, which then authenticates or logs you in into the public device. That will give more confidence to the consumer, and on your personal device, you can make sure that your data is protected and no one else has access to that data. Now, that data can be stored locally on the device or it can be stored in a Web3 wallet that only you have access to, but it has to be that confidence to the customer that it's his data and no one else has access to it. Even the service provider doesn't have access to it, right? So that's the key in creating that trust with the customer. As far as the technology of dynamic facial authentication is concerned, it's about ensuring spoofing attacks, making sure you can't replay with a picture or a recorded video, and the technology learns the changes in behavior and things like that. Those technologies exist with the use of AI and ML and other spoof detection technologies to bring that type of confidence into the solution.
So you are coming back to the same circle, like, you were talking about the OTP, right? Someone who has the authentication, and you just mentioned you are going to go back to the, like, sending the...
But there is no OTP. There is no OTP in that.
Yeah, the key component here is that an OTP can easily be intercepted, right? It's a knowledge-based factor. When you're capturing a biometric, it's something that's done in real time, and there's advanced algorithms that are being used in the background to assess, is this a real-time capture of me, or is this a previous representation of me where someone took a picture and held it in front of the camera? The attack vector for something like that is much different and much more difficult than the attack vector for going after something like a one-time passcode, right? So you get much higher level of confidence when using a biometric. And then to the trust standpoint, I 100% agree with that one of the big things that we're going to run into is that with any new technology, users are going to be a bit distrustful of it until they understand it a bit better. The benefit that we have on our side is that there's a whole generation of users growing up that are used to biometrics where it's built into their iPhone, it's built into their Android phone. So they're going to become much more used to it, right? But then it's also making sure that we educate and then also that we have ethical practices as well, so we don't abuse or lose that trust that we've gained from the users. So there's no one single thing we have to do. There's multiple things that we have to do as an industry to make sure that we build up that trust and we maintain it, and we use the product in a secure way that is once again better than an OTP or a knowledge-based factor.
One more quick question.
Okay, yeah.
Right there, yep.
Yeah, just one question. You mentioned it a couple of times as far as privacy and protection. U.S. laws as far as privacy is antiquated, to say the best. Even EU, as she mentioned, is, I guess, at the forefront of it. They have almost no regulations as far as the marketing data towards facial, like this facial recognition that takes place for protecting a customer. There's almost no regulations to limit what, outside of how long they can store the data, like compliance. You guys have standards and regulations, which is amazing, but if there's no enforcement of those, there are bad actors that will continue to abuse people's trust. Is there anything that you guys see on the horizon that will counter that?
So 100% agree with you, and actually our company's actually met with Senator Wyden to talk about this exact topic and offer support for helping the government create more standardized rules around how we regulate how biometrics is being used, right? And if you look at BIPA and other regulations, those are pretty good starting points. There can always be more, but those are good starting points of where we can go as a as a company, like let me say as a country, towards implementing secure privacy laws. So we do our best to talk about it and advocate it, and then also we have been talking with government officials, offering support and suggestions for what you should think about in terms of regulation.
I think that's key, that it's collaborative. It's not the regulators making decisions and the industry have to live with it. It's you're working together to try to come up with what's reasonable and workable, but it's a process that has to happen. So that's
Yes.
a great question. So I think we're out of time, but thanks our panel. It was a great conversation, and thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.